Depending on what kind of horror you're watching, you could be faced with all-out gore all the time. Even in this kind of scenario though, there are certain moments when filmmakers decide to depart from the bloodshed in a tasteful cutaway or a mysterious cliffhanger. That isn't what audiences want though, you bloodthirsty lot. You want to see all-out chaos. So I'm Amy from What Culture, and here are 10 horror movies that unbelievably cut what we wanted to see. 10. Nash gets ripped apart. The Hitcher. Deep into the movie's third act, our leading girl, Nash, is kidnapped by the psychopathic murderous John Ryder, who ties her between two trucks. Ryder is behind the wheel of one of the trucks, and in the event that he hits the gas, Nash will be ripped apart. He attempts to goad protagonist Jim into shooting him, but when Jim refuses, Ryder hits the pedal, killing Nash. Despite the film hardly shying away from gore up to this point, we never actually get to see Nash get torn in half, instead seeing her hands be pulled on before it cuts to black. Whilst you certainly can argue that leaving audiences to imagine the grisly outcome is far more effective, the sudden decision to deprive audiences of a gory death scene felt contradictory to the film's style and tone up to that point. One of the producers even unbelievably tried to blame the film's commercial disappointment on the decision not to show her death, which really, we all know that is not the reason it flopped. 9. The Predator vs. King Willie. Predator 2. Predator 2 may be a somewhat uneven sequel, but you cannot fault its ambition in moving it from the original location in South America's jungles to the concrete jungle of LA. One of the most hyped up moments in the entire film occurs when King Willie, the badass head of the Jamaica voodoo posse, faces off against Predator in an alleyway. As the cloaked Predator approaches Willie, he draws a large sword and prepares for what's due to be a pretty epic battle. However, director Stephen Hopkins instead immediately cuts to a shot of Willie's decapitated head being carried away by the Predator, who takes his skull as a trophy. The fact that the Predator kept hold of Willie's skull indicates that he was a worthy opponent and didn't go down easily, which kind of makes it even worse that we didn't get to see the fight. It would have been really cool. The third mainline film, Predators, did however seek to remedy this misstep by having Yakuza enforcer Kenzo battle the Predator with a samurai sword, and that turned out to be one of the film's sharpest action scenes. 8. Jason destroys Paula. Friday the 13th Part 6, Jason Lives. There are horror franchises where subtlety has an important part to play. Friday the 13th is not one of them. Even with the 6th film being the series' most playful and self-aware entry, it was hugely irritating that we never got to see what happened to poor sweet Paula. She gets cornered in her cabin by Jason, but then the director decided to cut away just as he raises his machete. All we see is a splash of blood and a brief beat where Jason smashes her head through a window before dragging her back inside. But the actual detail of her death is never shown. Later, Sheriff Garris enters the cabin and we catch a fleeting glimpse of her blood splattered all over the place, suggesting Jason really went to town on her. In terms of sheer mess, it's one of Jason's most gnarly kills, which makes it make even less sense that we are left to figure it out in our heads. 7. The Ancient Ones. The Cabin in the Woods. This film ends with the shocking revelation that the killing rituals are actually carried out to satiate a race of evil deities living beneath the earth. These deities are known as the Ancient Ones. Thoroughly pissed off at having been used as pawns for this last ritual, Dana and Marty decide that humanity isn't really worth their sacrifice and simply light up a blunt and wait for the end of the world. In the final scene, we see the lab and the cabin destroyed as a giant hand bursts up through the ground, signifying the apocalypse coming as the Ancient Ones rise. However, in an all-timer case of cinematic blue balls, we never actually get to see more than the subterranean entity's hand, leaving audiences to ponder what the hell these things actually look like. Ultimately, this was probably more due to budgetary restrictions than anything else, but it's still really annoying that we never got to look him in the eye. 6. David kills Shaw. Alien Covenant. Covenant caught a lot of flack for trying to completely separate itself from its predecessor Prometheus, and that included booting out its protagonist Elizabeth Shaw. Though Shaw was initially intended to reprise her role in a full-on Prometheus sequel called Paradise, ultimately the decision was made to rework the movie into a bridging vessel of sorts between Prometheus and Alien, and so Shaw was no longer the protagonist. But when Rapace was confirmed to still be appearing in the film, most fans assumed she'd show up in Covenant's third act in order to help Daniels and the other survivors. But instead, Shaw only appeared physically in a prequel video released online shortly before Covenant hit cinemas. In the film, we eventually see her corpse, having been murdered and experimented on by the malevolent droid David. Shaw's death was always going to bum fans out, but at least there was hope she'd sacrifice herself in order to save the remaining crew. Instead, we never even got to see her death on screen, which felt like an insanely cheap cop-out for a likeable character, especially as Rapace had agreed to come back for the movie and everything. 5. NAULS' death. The Thing. As tight and exquisitely crafted as John Carpenter's The Thing is, fans have been left hanging for the better part of 4 decades regarding the fate of the Antarctic Research Station's cook, NAULS. In the film's climax, NAULS just disappears. He wanders off, and though the audience is left to assume he was probably killed by the monstrous Blair thing, this is never categorically confirmed in the film itself. The thing is, this wasn't even Carpenter trying to be ambiguous or just getting sloppy. He had a plan for a scene in which we see NAULS' fate in all its horrifying graphic detail. As scripted and storyboarded, NAULS would have been attacked and assimilated by the Blair thing, with tentacles bursting out of his body as MacReady helplessly watches in horror. It would have evidently been one of the most ambitious and complex effect sequences in the entire movie, but due to time and budgetary constraints, the scene wasn't ever produced. There's plenty of other great effects and great scenes to make up for it, but damn, really is a bit of a shame. 4. Burt Gummer runs out of ammo. Tremors 2, Aftershocks. Tremors 2 Aftershocks may not quite live up to the campy fun of the original, but as straight-to-video sequels go, it's practically miraculous, in large part due to the scene-stealing presence of the hilarious survivalist Burt Gummer. One of Gummer's most memorable scenes occurs in the 3rd act when he returns to reunite with the rest of the crew after having been ambushed by Shriekers. At this point, a grubby, bloody, and very pissed-off Burt explains what happened to him by way of a now legendary monologue. He explains how dozens of Shriekers ambushed him and he shot them all down, then ran them all over and even fought some of them with hand-to-hand combat. As fantastic as the speech's delivery was, there's no Tremors fan alive that wouldn't have actually wanted to see this play out. Considering the sequel's budget was just 40% of what the original film had, it's safe to assume that Burt's battle was probably just another victim of budgetary problems. 3. Georgie and Gabe explode. Ready or Not. Ready or Not is one of the most satisfying horror films of the last few years, when new bride Grace finds herself being hunted by her husband's extended family as part of a weird ritual. If Grace can evade her pursuers until dawn, the ritual will apparently kill them all, and at the film's end we learn in a hilarious fashion just how true that is. No, the family doesn't just drop dead at sunrise, that would be way too boring. Instead, they all explode. The ritual also takes no prisoners, as among the exploded victims are 2 literal children, Georgie and Gabe. Though Georgie did, in fairness, try to kill Grace earlier in the film, it's still shocking that he, his brother and their mother all simultaneously explode into piles of gore. Now, some people have pointed out that they think it's rather a shame that the kids conveniently run out of the room seconds before dying, meaning we're denied the money shot of them being blown to bits, only to see a spray of blood from outside the doorway. Now, it's my humble opinion that you're a weirdo if you're upset about not seeing children die, but, you know, each to their own. 2. The Full-Blood Orgy. Event Horizon. Paul W.S. Anderson's cult classic sci-fi horror film Event Horizon boasts one of the most amusingly genre-savvy moments in cinema history. This occurs when the astronauts are exploring the desolate titular spaceship and they stumble across a video log of the original crew participating in what can only be described as a bloody orgy. A brief montage shows a collection of nauseating images, the crew having clearly lost their minds after opening the portal to hell. Ever the smart man, Captain Miller responds by bluntly telling his fellow astronauts, "We're leaving." Anderson has spoken extensively about how thoroughly Event Horizon was chopped up in post-production to deliver a more palatable product for mainstream audiences, and this resulted in a greatly extended version of the blood orgy scene being left on the cutting room floor. A few years ago, special effects supervisor Dave Bonnywell clarified the full extent of what was originally planned. I mean, the script even detailed a woman eating her own baby, though this was cut before shooting started. All sorts of messed up stuff was filmed. I mean, we're talking a woman getting her tits ripped clean off, someone getting drill bits inserted into their teeth and gums, etc, etc. Do I personally want to see that? No. Do I think it would have been super smart to release it in a no-holds-barred director's cut? Absolutely. And they really missed a trick there. 1. Hoffman's death. Saw the final chapter. Saw the final chapter neatly wrapped up the original run of films by revealing that Dr. Gordon was Jigsaw's final apprentice, as most fans had predicted years and years prior. The final scene sees Gordon lock the corrupted Jigsaw apprentice in the series' iconic bathroom with no means of freeing himself, seemingly condemning him to death. But considering how much of a vicious sadist Hoffman was shown to be throughout the series, fans really deserve to see him definitively killed off in a brutally over-the-top fashion. Though Hoffman's death seemed fairly concrete, no one's ever really dead in the Saw franchise unless you physically see it, and even in the 2 subsequent Saw films, we've still never had 100% confirmation of his demise. Given that he was far more of a villain than the original Jigsaw ever was, having him maybe die off screen was a limp, cowardly cop-out. And with that, we've reached the end of this list of 10 horror movies that unbelievably cut what we wanted to see. Which one of these annoyed you the most? Let us know in the comments down below. And remember to check out whatculture.com for more lists and articles like this every single day. As always, I've been Amy from What Culture, and I'll catch you next time.